Good Monday morning. Welcome to the Millionaire Mindset Book Club. My name is Rick, and we are reading Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins. We're getting close to the end. We're on chapter 16, so we should finish this up next Monday or Tuesday. And then we're going to go to this one, John Maxwell's No Limits, right? John Maxwell's No Limits. You can pick this up on Amazon and hope that you will get that. Good morning. Good morning, Jacqueline. So today we're on chapter 16, right? Reframing the power of perspective, right? Perspective. Tony Robbins starts the chapter out by asking about, what if you heard a footstep? What if you heard a footstep? What would that mean? What would that mean to you? So it probably doesn't mean anything. If you're walking along a busy street, right, you hear footsteps, right? There are footsteps all around you. Doesn't necessarily mean anything. But what if you're walking alone late at night and then you hear footsteps? Or if you're home alone and you hear footsteps downstairs in your house, you're supposed to be alone, right? Do those footsteps have meaning then? And depending on your experience of the past, of course they do, right? It depends on the context that you hear them in. The meaning of any experience that we have in life depends upon the frame that you put around it, right? If you change the frame, if you change the context, the meaning changes instantly. So he says one of the most effective tools for personal change is learning how to put the best frames on any experience, right? And obviously this process is called reframing, right? Reframing, right? He has an example, right? On page 290 of the book. If you have the book, he has an example. I'll try and show it and see if it works. Let's see. It's always difficult when you got a background up. Can't see it. And so it's a word, it's a word that's just spelled out in a different format than you're used to, right? And so when you first look at it, you may not be able to see it. And it's the word fly, and it's made up of the shapes that are around it, right? And then the space in the center of the shapes is the word. As an example, think about the FedEx logo, right? The logo for FedEx. Have you ever noticed the arrow that's in the FedEx logo? Well, if you haven't, it's between the E and the X, right? It is between the E and the X in FedEx, right? FEDEX. And there's an arrow in the logo. Once you see the arrow, it's virtually impossible. Once you notice it, it's virtually impossible for you to look at the FedEx logo again without seeing the arrow. I mean, it's just a way, because now our perception, our vision has been reframed, right, to focus on this arrow. Tony Robbins has said many times in this book, right, that nothing in the world has any inherent meaning, right? We feel about something, how we feel about something, and what we do in the world are dependent upon our perception of it. There's another book that I've just recently read called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And he talks about the fact how that there is everything that exists right this second, right now. Right? The things that happened in the past are past. You can't go back. You can't bring them back, right? That specific point in time, the specific people that were there, the specific things that happened at that point in time, it's gone, right? It doesn't exist anymore. The future is simply our vision of what might happen, what could happen, the different possibilities. So obviously the future doesn't exist yet. So the only thing that actually exists at this moment is now. And that's where we need to live, right? That's where we need to spend our time, is now. And so when you think about perceptions, a lot of times we frame our now based on what happened in the past, right? Our past experiences, or our perceived experiences of the future. What is this going, if I do this right now, what's going to happen? Well, we don't know. Right? We don't know. So but we tend to frame our now with our past and our future, instead of focusing on the now, right? So nothing in the world has any inherent meaning, right? It's only the meaning that we give to it. Misfortune, right? He says misfortune is a point of view, right? Misfortune is a point of view. I told this the other day, the story about the two shoe salesmen put down on an island out in the Pacific, and one calls home and says, "Come get me," right? Nobody wears shoes, right? And the other one calls and says, "Send more shoes. The possibilities are endless," right? It's perception, it's point of view. Human beings tend to attach specific meanings to experiences, right? We say this happened, right? This happened. And so the word this means that, right? In actuality, there could be any number of ways to interpret that, any experience, right? And so we tend to frame things based on the experience that we've had in the past, right? Because we've got this, we have this idea that, oh, this happened before, it'll happen again. But a lot of times the way that we, if we change these patterns, these habitual patterns, we can create greater choices for our lives. Remember, perceptions are creative. If we perceive something as a liability, then that's the message that we deliver to the brain. The brain then produces this state, right? Potentially a state of anxiety or whatever that makes it into reality. But if we change our frame of reference by looking at the same situation from a different point of view, we can change the way we respond in life, right? You look at it from the point of view of, the opportunities are endless because nobody wears shoes, versus it's pointless because nobody wears shoes, right? And that's what reframing is all about, right? We don't see the world as it is. We don't see the world actually as it is because we can interpret it from a lot of different points of view, right? And so again, he's got a couple of other pictures, right? Whether it's an old lady or the picture, you've probably seen it before, whether it's an old lady or a beautiful young woman, depends on your frame of view, right? How you look at the picture. Remember that our past experiences, right? It's important to note that our past experiences regularly filter our ability to see what's really happening in the world, right? The key to success is to consistently represent our experience in ways that support us in producing greater results for ourselves and for others, right? Excuse me. So a couple different things, right? In its simplest form, when we talk about reframing, it's early, you got to have your coffee, right? We talk about reframing in its simplest form. Reframing is changing a negative statement into a positive one by changing the frame of reference that you use to perceive the experience, right? So there's two major ways to reframe experiences, right? Either alter our, these are ways to alter our perception about something. Either context reframing or content reframing, right? Context reframing involves taking an experience that seems to be bad, upsetting, or undesirable, and then showing how the same behavior or experience is actually a great advantage in another context. Nobody wears shoes, right? Do they not wear shoes? They don't wear shoes because they don't have them, right? So that's a different context, right? He said children's literature, right? Kids' books are filled with examples of context reframing, right? Rudolph's nose, which made people make fun of him, is actually an advantage and makes him a hero in the context of a dark and snowy night, right? The ugly duckling suffered great pain because he was so different, but his difference was in his beauty as a full-grown swan, right? So think about in business, context reframing is invaluable, right? Our mismatching partner, he says, was a liability until we realized after brainstorming he could be a great asset as a backup, right? Great innovations are made by those who know how to reframe activities and problems into potential resources, right? Think about the fact that oil, right? He says oil was once considered something that destroyed the value of land for crop usage. But look at it today, right? Look at it today. Susie and I were just on the road this weekend, right? And there were places where it was, $5 a gallon. Ouch, right? But at one time it was considered just it was a nuisance thing, right? What's another one? It says several years ago, lumber yards had difficulty disposing of all of the sawdust from their mills, right? And somebody said, oh, you know what? If we take all this sawdust and mix it with glue, we can make pressboard, plywood, right? Pressboard or plywood, right? Another guy pressed sawdust together and mixed lighter fluid in it and made those logs that you put in the fireplace, right? Presto logs. They after contracting to take away all the worthless sawdust from the mills in 2 years, it says he developed a multi-million-dollar business, right? Context. Content reframing involves taking the exact same situation and changing what it means. You might say that your son or your daughter never stops talking. They never shut up, right? But after content reframing, you might say, well, they must be a very young man to have a very intelligent young man to have so much to say, right? There's a story about an army general that said we were not retreating, we're just advancing in another direction, right? When somebody dies, when somebody passes away, right? A lot of people are sad, but some people are happy, right? They're joyous. They've reframed somebody passing away into an occasion that now this means that the person who's deceased is never gone from us. They're always in our hearts. They're in the presence of the Lord, whatever the case may be, right? So content reframing. Another type of content reframing is actually changing the way you see, hear, or represent a situation, right? And so he talks about taking what somebody said to you, and he says envision yourself smiling as he says the same negative words expressed in the tonality of your favorite singer, right? Or see the same experience in your brain, only this time with the speaker surrounded by your favorite color, right? I'll give you another example, again from the church, right? Somebody told us one time, if you're upset with somebody about the way that they've behaved or the things that they've said, to imagine when you looked at them that Jesus was standing behind them with his hand on their shoulder, because Jesus loves everybody, right? So how would that change your perception of that person, right? One of the keys to success is finding the most useful frame for any experience so that you can turn it into something that works for you instead of against you, right? So can you think of something in your mind, right? Can you think of something in your mind that you could reframe and put into an experience that's happened to you, right? That you could reframe and look at in a different light, right? I'll use an example of children, right? If you look at some things that children do when you're in the moment, right? And this is for you, Jacqueline, right? You look at the things that sometimes that children do when you're in the moment, and they are they're terrible, they're horrible. You've had this just terrible experience, right? And yet when you get to be my age now, we look back on those same moments and man, we got a great story to tell. Right? We have a great story to tell. I know somebody, I know somebody who travels, right? Who travels a lot in their job, right? And he said that there are no bad airport experiences. There are only good stories, right, that come from those. So it just depends on your frame of mind, right? So think about this. A lot of times people find it easier to reframe when they're communicating with others than they do when they're communicating with themselves, right? We can do this too with ourselves. We can reframe those experiences for ourselves, right? We could remember we tend to replay these bad stories over and over in our mind. But what about if we could look at them from a different perspective, right? So your homework, right? Your homework for today, you think about reframing, is to go back in your memory, right? Go back in your memory and or even take today, the things that happened today, and if something happens to you that could be potentially upsetting, could be a problem, could be a liability, can you look at it in a different context? Can you look at it from a different perspective and reframe it and turn it into a positive thing? That's your challenge, right? There you go. That's your challenge for today, is to take something could be potentially negative and reframe it to turn it in. How can you reframe it and turn it into a positive? Okay. That's it. Monday morning. Don't forget our next book. You should go ahead and get this now, right? If you're gonna be reading along, right? Is John Maxwell's No Limits, right? Don't put limits on yourself. It'll kind of go right along with unlimited power, right? And again, if you know somebody that could benefit from the book club, from starting out their day with 15 minutes of something positive, ask them, tell them, hey, join the Millionaire Mindset Book Club, and we'll get them hooked up, right? There's a couple hundred of us in the book club, right? Not too many show up in the morning. That's okay. People are watching the videos, so it'll be posted. The YouTube video will be posted here on the Millionaire Mindset Book Club group a little bit later today. So Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins. I hope you have a fantastic day. Get out there and make today the best day ever so far. See you tomorrow.